Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Amanda Newell. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Adapt Media, and I'm also honored to be the Ad Club's Vice President. Now, the Ad Club is a volunteer organization run by your peers. All funds generated by the Ad Club's educational events actually go to NABS, the industry's own charity, as well as fund a series of scholarships that help to raise up the next generation of advertising professionals. And while our educational events like Out of Home Day and Digital Day are more devoted to our professional lives, the Mindful Morning series tends to tackle those issues that are a little more personal to us. So today's event, which tackles age discrimination in all its forms, is one that arose as a result of a 2019 CBC article that exposed terrible ageism problems within our industry. And the statistics are stark. 33% of Canada's labour force are over the age of 50, and yet only 10% of that group is represented in advertising agencies and the advertising, marketing, and PR world. Now, Mark Reed, the CEO of WPP, did seem to encapsulate ad agencies' disdain for their elders when he said rather proudly, look at our people. The average age of someone at WPP is under 30, and luckily, they don't harken back to the 80s. Now, ironically though, those under 30 in our industry are also feeling similarly slighted, with a Harris poll released only this week that states that 36% of millennials and Generation Z have experienced ageism in the workplace, with all of those issues tending to be about perceived lack of experience. So today's panel is uniquely suited to armor up and battle ageism in the workplace. I'd like to introduce Alexandra Panousis, CEO and Chair of Dentsu Media, who has never met a taboo that she didn't face down and make cower in the corner, be that racism, ageism, sexism. She is most certainly not a virtue signaling CEO. Andrea Sanchez is partner at Ricketts Harris LLP, and she brilliantly brandishes the rule of law in order to fight age discrimination in all of its guises in all facets of Canadian industry. Julia Molden is the canny and prescient author of three books that tackle emerging trends within the workplace. She is also the rather genius creator, innovator of the RIPE program through NABS, which is devoted to career transitioning. And it's an especially vital course certainly in light of ageism, but also in light of the great resignation to come. Now, Saeed Zaman is the Senior Vice President and Executive Director of Digital at Golan. And what I find especially refreshing about Saeed is the fact that in the world of diplomatic fence-sitting that is PR, he is a PR executive that eschews all of that careful approach in favor of passionate discourse and also, on occasion, rage-filled authenticity when it comes to any injustices in our industry, be it racism, nepotism, or ageism. So welcome, warriors, today. Now, as for this panel's very serious edict, it will be less of a panel, it will be more of a conversation. And it will be one that's positive and constructive and hopeful, with 50 minutes devoted to the industry as it is now, and 30 minutes of conversation devoted to what the industry will be. So in terms of questions, we would delightedly answer those in the 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the end of our panel discussion. Please put your questions in the Q&A section of the session, as opposed to the chat, and that way we can make sure that we answer all of those questions as they come up. So now, warriors, in a world that's fanatically devoted to data, how do we ensure that our one definitive number, our age, is not the number that we're judged by? And Andrea, I'm going to start off with you with some very big questions here. Now, given your expertise in employment law, and I'm going to address the global elephant in the room, which is, of course, the pandemic. What What sort of age-related trends have you seen during the pandemic? And what is the pandemic truly being used as a cover to lay off aging staff? And is cheaper and younger talent being prized over that of veterans with larger salaries? Please, Andrea.
Thank you. I don't know if the pandemic has really affected this trend, but I've certainly seen in the last, I'd say 10 years, an increasing number of people who come to me saying that they feel they've been discriminated against because of their age, either while they're working or in termination of their employment. So I will say at the outset, because maybe this is something that goes without saying, but should be said, is that it is, age discrimination is a real thing under the law, that the Human Rights Code or Act, depending on your province, usually, or all of them do as far as I'm aware, protect you against discrimination on the basis of age in employment and in other areas as well, barring certain exceptions. So you can imagine, for instance, this doesn't necessarily apply to your industry, but it might. Say you hire people to go out to a youth event and you want to hire youth and it's only youth are allowed, then you can discriminate, but generally you're not allowed to. So, the pandemic, I think I wouldn't want to say that it's used as an excuse. I don't think employers are necessarily just getting rid of people left and right and center. There were lots of programs that helped them to retain employees, like assistance programs and reductions in rent and so on and so forth. But I think what is interesting about any change, shifting to work from home, possibly the pandemic, is that people are going to look at things and question the future of work, right? And that's kind of the thing that we're going to be talking about a bit today in your industry. What's the future going to look like? So what's hard about age discrimination, and I'm sure everyone who's experienced it will say this, and I am answering your question, I promise, is that it's very hard to identify. And what's problematic from a legal perspective, it's even harder to prove. So how do you go in to a human rights tribunal and say, I didn't get the job because of my age? How can you do that? Certainly, if you're talking about using the pandemic as an excuse, employers will often use the following terms, and maybe everyone's heard this or someone in their family's experienced it or a friend. You just don't have the right skill set. Your knowledge base is not up to speed or whatever it is, But I think as a takeaway from that, to anyone in a position of power, to anyone who is negotiating a new position, and I say this sort of as a remedial way to address this kind of problem, is think about being in your job for the long haul. And when you're hiring people, think about that too. There's a huge cost to turnover, to churning people through jobs a couple of years, not making them long-term positions, and I've talked about this with Julia, in fact, in some other capacities, and this maybe is for something that we'll talk about the next, where we're going to go. But think about how you can make work not so much based on your age, but based on your skills, on the values that you have, on the things that you bring to the table. If we associate age only with those things, you and I all of us know someone who's young, but doesn't know how to turn on their Apple TV. Those aren't necessarily correlated. So I think that there's ways to think about, and this is why the pandemic, I think, is bringing that out. People have adapted. You're talking to me in an industry where the average age is much older. People have really adapted to it. So I don't think that you can always use that as an excuse. So there's going to be other things that people use euphemistically to certainly eliminate people's positions because they might be expensive. But I think that, as we go through this and we talk more specifically about your industry, I think we want to think about talking more about values and, people who are eager to learn can learn new skills. People who aren't eager to learn at any age aren't going to learn new skills. And those are the things that I think that employers have started to even think about more. And we'll talk about that again, I think, when we talk about the future. So.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. I don't know why, but I hadn't realized that it had been something that had been happening for the last 10 years. It's interesting. I tend to think of it being a fairly recent realization by our entire industry. But of course, this has been building and building, and you're right, the pandemic will always be used as a cover, but perhaps it's been building slowly over the past decade. So thank you for that. Julia, you created the RIGHT program for NABS. And as we know, NABS is the industry's own charity, and this actual program is of no charge to the people that enroll in it. You created the program for people over 45 in our world who needed to visualize their next step. So, and that program began in 2017. So how has the workshop, how would you say the workshop has evolved since COVID hit, since March of 2020?
I just want to do one correction there, which is they launched it in 2015. NABS had the foresight and compassion to say, look, there's a real need here. And, you know, my book that it's built around was published almost 11 years ago. So this has been growing for a very long time. And it's just become sort of more high level awareness for people in the last couple of years. But it's a trend that's been taking shape over time. And so NABS approached me and said, and I just want to do a top line summary of the program because I have no idea how many people in your audience really know about it. But so the NABS Right program is designed to do three things. It's a kind of triage because there are a lot of people who come through the program who have been pushed off a cliff and are terrified that they're never going to work again. And so the idea is to help them understand their value as human beings and their value in the marketplace. And then the second component is to help people learn the steps, skills, and mindset required to make a successful transition, which is different when you're at this stage than it is at earlier stages, although the model that's at the heart of it applies across all cohorts. And then the third piece is to develop a sense of community so that people realize, okay, I'm not in this alone. There are lots of really great and talented people like me, and I can work collaboratively with these people so that I'm not going on this uncomfortable, unsettling journey all by myself. So that had been running for, well, how long has the pandemic been going on now? What's the count? Are we at 18 months now? Are we 16, whatever it is?
Yeah.
So early 2020, when people started to realize, we realized like the rest of the world that we had to do it in the digital space. So we moved the program online. And so one of the great things about being able to do it via Zoom was that we were able to reach people across the country more easily, as everybody's discovered, right? There are some silver linings to this pandemic. And then the other thing, of course, is some of the components encourage people to get out into the world as they start to figure out what their next move might be. And how do you get out into the world when you can't get out into the world? So how do you leverage this technology and make it work for you? So we had to rejig the program, and we did it by collaborating with the people who go through the program because they were learning as we were learning, and we were able to share what worked for them and be able to introduce it into the rest of the program. So it's changed to meet the needs of today. And we'll be able to, just as, everybody's grappling with this, how much of is there going to be of the work from home, how much of it is going to be us going back to the workplace. So we'll be able to retain some of that going forward.
All right, now I warned you that there might be some off the cuff questions here. So your first one is going to be for you. With some of the things that we've uncovered, with the fact that 36% of millennials and Gen Zers are feeling the effects of ageism, which is to me totally shocking. Are you thinking about creating another program for those under the age of 30 to maybe address that?
Yeah, there absolutely should be. And, I guess when we get to the future, where are we going from here piece, the model that's at the heart of my program that I designed, that's in all of my books and for this program for NABS, it applies across all sectors and every cohort. And because the workplace has been so profoundly disrupted, and we know that that's just going to continue, all of the pressures that we're going to face, we need to learn these basic skills. I'm absolutely fascinated, though. I didn't see this article, and I would like to know more about how young people are experiencing this, because the way that I've been thinking about it, we keep learning, right? This process is alive. The program was launched in 2015, but it keeps morphing as we learn more and more. And so what we're talking about today is age diversity, the power of having people across all cohorts in the workforce, but not working in silos and not just being, defensive about one another. We know the war between the generations. It's been written about extensively. But how do we collaborate so that we can get the best out of each of us and, help the organization thrive? So I want to learn more about this so that we can incorporate it into future programs. I think there'll be a whole roster of programs that are developed as a result of this emerging understanding.
I think that's fantastic. And I like the fact that all of these programs are living and breathing and involve so much collaboration so that you're responding to real world challenges as they happen. And so it's not just about, the over 50s who are now transitioning out. It's about things like the Great Resignation, where people are thinking, I don't want to be in advertising anymore, but how do I get to that next step in my career? So I love that you're constantly thinking about that and constantly incorporating all of that into your programs. So Saeed, we've talked a great deal about older people in our industry, and as we have just done now, but you have a pretty fantastic anecdote that addresses the stresses that younger people feel in our industry, and about not feeling respected, about not feeling relevant, about not feeling worthy. So could you tell us about that story? Because I think it really nicely encapsulates everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is about, I would say, 7-8 years ago at one of my previous agencies. And one of my direct reports kept coming up to me and saying, I really, I'm 29 right now. I really want to make 30 under 30. And there's a publication where you can apply to, and money is involved. And I was kind of taken aback by that, because I'm like, if somebody truly wants to recognize you, some kind of publication, I don't think you need to pay them to do it, because in my industry, that would be a form of sponsored content, right? Like paid media. So, but this person was relentless, kept coming up to me and kept saying if I don't make 30 under 30, this is my last chance. It was I feel like, especially for the younger folks, I feel like it's become like a checklist, just if I don't do this, I'm not going to make it. If I don't do this, I'm not going to be taken seriously. 30 under 30 or 40 under 40, they also have now a 20 under 20, which really blows my mind, because, I want somebody to do a long form article or an expose, and just find, where are they now? Find these people who made 20 and 20 or 30 under 30 or 40 under 40, and then kind of look at their lives. Did it change for the better? Did it not change? And I really honestly feel that's kind of plays into the bias of ageism, because for the younger folks, it's if I don't do this, I'm not going to be taken seriously. Whereas on the people who are older, they look at all these 20 under 20 and 30 and 30, they're like, oh my God, I wasted my life. Look at how much these people are getting recognized for, which is totally not true, and every time I see that on the younger side, it kind of just makes me, sad and depressed, because, that's not some kind of yardstick or some checklist that you need to check off, otherwise you're not going to be successful. I always think about, Colonel Sanders, KFC, the founder. That person apparently failed at, 50, 60 things in his life, and then one day just woke up and said, well, I can make a pretty good chicken, and the rest is history. So I just don't understand this whole obsession with, this checklist and 30 under 30, 40 under 40. I mean, it's meaningless to me.
Can I inject a note here?
Of course, please.
Zahid, I love that example. It's just so powerful. And so right away, my head goes, well, there's one advantage to having all these different ages in the workforce. You can talk to me and I will tell you at 65, I feel like I'm just getting started. I'm working on my next 2 books. And, for me, it's the very beginning. So when I was younger, I said, if I haven't, I had all those kind of milestone, and it's total nonsense, and in fact, it's incumbent on us to stay fully engaged and alive. So, yeah, so you see what happens when we bring people of different ages together. That's one of the things, Amanda, in your design of this that I so appreciate, that it's not just older people. So Andrea's younger, Alex is younger than me. I'm the old person here, but yeah, I love that you've got a range.
Well, I think either you or Andrea said it best when we seem to have come to a culture where we're comparing constantly, as opposed to celebrating. And I think it was actually Julia that said that we should live till we die. And so
Yeah.
we should continue living and learning and forgetting, say, these milestones and deadlines that we have to adhere to. Andrea had said that it's the same thing with the milestones of when you're supposed to get married and when you're supposed to have your next child and when you're supposed to have your next child after that. Why we keep putting these deadlines onto each other when we know that life is short and meant to be lived, not to live to these artificial milestones, is totally beyond me. So Saeed, that to me it's a great example, and it speaks to the artificiality of these ridiculous milestones that we impose. Now, and also, if anybody has not had a chance to, speaking of long form articles, if you haven't had a chance, have a read of Saeed's Pixel of Dorian Gray. I think it quite successfully spears the ridiculousness of the social circus, but also the idea of comparing yourself to these invisible and impossible yardsticks. But it's great, and Saeed is going to get into he's going to get into his love of social media in a little while, so I'm excited about that. So, Alex, in our first discussion, Andrea talked about the moral obligation of the legal industry to develop the next generation. Now, do you feel that the advertising and the marketing industry has that same imperative, a moral imperative?
No, I don't. Look, do we worship at the worship the young, worship the beautiful? We do. I was looking at there was a post on my social feed yesterday from a beauty influencer in Montreal, and she had a picture of J-Lo, Jennifer. And she said, why is it that women in their 50s have to aspire to look like women in their 30s? And the reality is that's unattainable. And, I don't even have a point of view on that because, I just think that's the reality that we're in. But in business, okay, so especially in advertising, labor is our biggest cost, okay? And cost cutting, not just today, after COVID, but, I've been in this business for 30, almost 25, almost 30 years. And the reality is that cost cutting is a matter of survival, but what you don't cut is you don't cut value, okay? And nobody owes you a job. That's the reality. If you're not delivering value, you are not going to have a role. And so, is the debate ageism or is the debate value? From the view that I kind of, in my experiences, it's that. I remember I had left a job. It was a personal reason. I'd left a job to do some medical treatments. And I remember going to a recruiter after that. And the recruiter said to me, and I'll never forget this. He said, Alex, you're amazing, but you're a little long on the tooth. Because no one sees you as digital. No one sees you as forward thinking. You're not the technology lead. And I went, what do you mean? Look at me, I'm modern, but the reality is I just stopped. And, sometimes feedback is a gift. And what I learned was, sharpen those things, polish those things. I learned to code. I did design thinking. I went and did a course on product management. I really retooled my career in the technology area to give myself more personal velocity. And one, it did two things for me. One, it's given me a longer shelf life for sure, but it's also made me happier because now I feel I get value. I understand technology. I understand marketing logistics. I understand disruption. I've worked now and I've taken jobs where I've been able to do that. So I think that if I can give, don't paint there's definitely there was a lot in that WPP article and probably not the best and the best perspective, but don't become the victim. Take the opportunities available to you and start to solve the problem. Because what I bring to business in my 50s is a significant amount of transferable skills. I get business. I understand how to manage clients. I understand complexity. I understand strategy. However, I do need and you do too, you being our industry, needs to ensure we're leveling up on those skills. And when you do that, boy, it changes everything.
Absolutely. And in fact, oh, sorry, Julia, go on.
Well, I
please.
mean, I could just say about 100,000 things about that. That was great, Alex, really. And so it's really important. I hope we're going to get into this to talk about, you know, our role as individuals, right? That we shouldn't just leave it up to, you know, well, let somebody else fix it, right? That's the old model of life, and it doesn't work. And I loved what Alex said about, you know, she's happier. I mean, you get charged up, right? You're more interested in life. You're nicer to be around, you know, even anyway. So we could go on and on about that. But one of the pieces that I want to really bring people's attention to is that we need the business case for older workers. So, you know, organizations change because it's in their interest to do so, not because it's morally right. You know, the whole ESG piece that's emerging, you know, is a fine example of how organizations are shifting because they know that it's in their interest to take care of their, you know, environmental piece or their social piece, whatever it might be. So the same thing is true for age diversity. What is the value of older workers? You know, and Alex touched on a couple of examples. That's what we need to be thinking about, not, you know, are we discriminating against people because they're at a certain age?
Yeah,
so
it's almost like the legal debate, Julia, like that, you know, and listen, I get it. And, you know, and you know, we want to be a force of good. And, you know, obviously there's a huge risk and discriminate. Like I completely feel for that. But I think at the same time, you know, grab your career and take responsibility, right?
Yes.
And you know, right now, so I think that there's some staggering statistics. Like this morning, when I looked at my LinkedIn, I just did this because I got this like really cranky email from another market CEO about like some unprofessional behavior in recruiting, which it made me angry. But the reality is today in Toronto, or in Canada, there are 2,000 jobs in media, 2,000, right? Microsoft did a survey a few months ago with 40,000 employees around the world, and 41% said they wanted to switch or quit their job. So there's a war on talent, right? What I'm looking for, what I would love is I would love some entrepreneurial older worker to start a temp agency. I think that there would be so many opportunities to take those skills and harness them and look and drive value. So I think as much as, you know, like going back to personally, it's not the moral obligation. Is it the right thing? No, it isn't. Like I want to be able, you know, everybody needs to be treated equally, but you have to drive value, whether you're 22 or 52, you have to drive value. And if you do, I think there's lots of opportunity in business.
I couldn't agree more. Like, honestly, I don't care if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or beyond. As long as you have, you know, you approach things with a certain degree of logic and can make sense of your surroundings, I'm your biggest fan. You're on my team. I really don't care anything beyond that.
Exactly. I completely agree with all of you. And in fact, that feeds beautifully into the next question, which is of course for Julia. But the idea of that no one owes you a job, to Alex's point, that you have to add value to your own career. And Julia, one of your fantastic edicts, of course, is that you have to take that control to yourself. And what does that mean for ad veterans and also those just starting their careers? Both of those aspects have to take that control, but what does it mean?
Right. So we need like a weekend to unpack this, right? But I'll try to summarize it. And the first thing I would say is I mentioned it off the top, which is that the workplace has been disrupted, and that's just going to continue to intensify. And one of the things that I'm most interested in and I'm tracking is this notion of free agency. So the idea of job for life is gone, right? So when I was young, it was a mark against you if you moved around. You know, you really wanted to stay put for long periods of time, but that has gone. Employers are now starting to say, you know what, I don't want to hire somebody forever. I want to hire you for 2 years, and then we're going to renegotiate your contract at the end of that time. So that's one thing that's happening. And on the other side, employees are saying, you know, younger ones and older ones, there's a program in the federal government in Ottawa that recognizes this. that people are saying, I don't want to do the same thing or even, be inside the same organization for my entire career. I want to take charge of my career. So both of those things I salute, because I think that's really a much more natural way to be, and it's going to mean more complexity for organizations. But anyway, that's the whole weekend talk. So the components are knowledge and skills. So again, some of your other panelists have been talking about this so far. It's really important to stay in the game. And yes, wearing skinny pants is an important part of it, or having a great haircut, but that's not everything. You really need to be thinking as if you are at the very beginning, regardless of where you are in your career. So always upping your game. Thinking about our resources is critically important too. So it's not just, knowledge and skills. And by the way, I include soft skills, so-called soft skills in that, but the resources, which is largely your network. We know that the vast majority of jobs come through the network, especially the best jobs. They don't come through these systems that filter people. So your network is critically important at all stages of your career. And that includes people in your organization, in your field, in your sector, and way beyond those, because it's important to feed you, right? So Alex identified this, right? She became happier. It feeds you as you go through your career, but it also helps you identify where the opportunities are. And the final component, before you get to making the business case for why you're the ideal candidate at any stage of your career, is understanding your values. So what's important to you? And we see this a lot with the younger generations, which is, I find, very encouraging, right? That people are really wanting to live their values in the workplace, and employers are starting to respond to that. But for me, it's not about passions, right? We often hear about passions, and what are you passionate about? Passions are actually limiting. It's values, how you want to live. And the more you get to express those values and who you are, the more likely you are to be fulfilled and therefore more successful. So, i.e., a better employee.
I want
Okay,
to ask
top
something.
line, but hopefully that's helpful.
Sorry.
Andrea, sorry, yes, I think Andrea
This
would
is
like to.
maybe just kind of contrary, because
I know,
I'm
I'm
in a different
sure.
industry, but I'm okay with the idea. Work is changing. It always has been. There used to be an assembly line, and then there were robots, and people had to change. But I'm also concerned that we let employers off the hook. Now, I act for both employers and employees, so I'm going to throw this out there. But I don't think it's fair to say, because this is also an out, well, it's on you. You just didn't bother to do anything. And I'm going to say this to young people, if any of them are watching, right? Having a drink cart come by on Friday is cool, but that's not going to help you build your skills and help you to contribute to show your value, right? What I would negotiate is, well, I want a retraining program. I want a fund to help me to learn new skills. I want a mentor. I want to be involved in this organization, that's going to help me make the network connections that Julia is talking about. So I think that this is when you talk about, and this is what comes with wisdom and age, where you're like, oh, I wish I'd done that before. But I think, and your industry needs to acknowledge that too, I think, to give employees, they don't have to be there forever, but if they're going to be there for 5 years or come back or go and work for a client that you're going to work on later, depending, you want people that have skills and people that you're going to want to work with. So to me, I don't think it's always fair to just say, and I don't think anyone's saying that, but this notion of individual responsibility, you have to take ownership. You have to think about your career. You have to think about your future and what will help you, but you also think about that in terms of value, and it's not just about money. We've all had, jobs where we didn't make a lot, but we learned a ton. And those things are important. So I think, while it may sound great that everyone's going to be a consultant, I will tell you from a legal perspective, from an entitlement perspective, it's not always great, depending on where you are in your career and your other obligations. And I also want to throw out there.
You bring up a really good point about training. I just want to jump in. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but you bring up a good point. And because I gave that, I don't mean to suggest that it's all on you. But so look, I think I've worked for 3 or 4 big agencies. All of them have training programs. All of them do it. It's just people sometimes don't take advantage of what's in front of them. So part of that is taking advantage and ensuring that, to your point, asking for that. And, the drink card and the fun things that everyone does isn't as important as learning attend to commerce and some of the things that you're going to need technology moving forward. But I also think, again, I hear a lot of, and I'm getting I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat. Like, I feel like when you take personal ownership outside of the legal, like when you take personal ownership and you just really do an assessment, what do you need to do to drive value? What do you need to learn? What do you need to apply? It gives you more of a sense of personal control. And maybe you can't, I don't know, if an organization is going through change and you lose your job, all that does, having that in your background, is allows you to have more options in your next chapter. So I kind of feel like it's a two-way street.
It totally is. And I think that it's important to think of it from, and this is going to sound very aggressive, right? Then this is people who come to me when they've been terminated. I fire them up for their next job. Negotiate I know you can't always do it, but there's sometimes something small that you can think about. You're giving a lot to your employer, but you also, can ask for some things in return. So start thinking about that in your career. Think about where you want to try to go. If you think Alex is the most amazing career, or Saeed, and you meet with them and find out how you're going to get there, and they might tell you things like this. You know what? Networking's number one important. You should join Ad Club and join everything else. And that's what you got to do. But I also wanted to just throw out one other thing, which is I also want us to keep in mind that age discrimination is also connected with other things like racism and sexism and other, issues. So I don't want us to just think that this is, I'm going to say something, an old white person problem, right? There are other issues that people face based a lot on, as we sort of said, either, what your industry values or what any industry values, maybe not connecting with a certain individual, misperceptions, stereotypes, all those things also come into play. So if I think there are challenges that people face in connection with age discrimination that can make it a bit more challenging. So here I am to tell you to go in at 25 and negotiate your job. And that's pretty rich. But think about ways that you can, because not everyone feel they have that power. But think about ways that you can make small gains, or think about your career in a longer term. And I know, and this is people who are watching who are older will say, how am I going to do that? There's always time. There's always time to do that. Maybe you want to go back and do your MBA. Maybe you want to take a program or a course. There's always time. And to Julia's point and Alex's point, you're going to show your value. If a young lawyer comes to me and says, I'm excited about this, I want to do this, I'm like, yes, let's get on board, because there's opportunity there. And you're showing that you see opportunity and you're willing to try, just like Alex did, when she was told she was too old, but you take that as a challenge and find an opportunity, I think.
Yeah, I like that Alex was told that she was long in tooth, and then she sharpened her teeth to go after that. But I'm liking the fact that there are very concrete examples of what to be done here, whether it be the older person to start the temp agency to handle all of those free agents, or as Andrea just said, ensuring that when you're negotiating your contract, as aggressive and bold as it might be, to negotiate something that is with regards to having retraining or having a mentorship program. I love those ideas. Now, Saeed, I'm going to come back to you, because Andrea just talked a little bit, and we've certainly talked a lot about what we value in the industry and how worth is correlated to age, and then how somehow social media has contributed to this pervasive idea that age is the arbiter of worth and success. So how does social media, that incredible and ethereal world where we never age, where we're never unhappy, where we never fail professionally, and how does it feed into that falsity of age as a professional deadline? I know this is one of your favorite topics, and I will say we have 7 minutes left till the end of our show, till the Q&A.
Yeah, this is gonna probably appear like a dichotomy, because I lead digital and social media at my current agency and previous ones, and
this is what I love about you. You're willing to burn it all down.
Yeah, and I'm totally for all the positive sides that social media brings people together and all these other things. But sometimes the number one question I usually get from people when they meet me is like, how come I'm not on Twitter, right? And my response always is that I get all my narcissism needs from Facebook and LinkedIn, and I really don't feel the need to add a third layer of vanity, right? And I understand that comes off as like, but you lead digital. But I think there's some danger in sort of, and how it's contributed to ageism, because what happened was the internet exploded, right? And then all of a sudden you had all these websites, and you can just you can be anywhere in the world and go to a website and see all these glamorous people, Hollywood publications, everybody's successful. And then came Facebook, right? And then you're on these glossy websites, and then you go from that, and then you go to another web page with Facebook, and you see your face, and your brain equated them as the same, like this highly false pretense, right? So we started like dressing like them, eating like them, always happy. There's never a sad post. We're just insanely trendy, and then it's kind of that's why I wrote that piece that you mentioned earlier. I feel like life has become like the picture of Dorian Gray in reverse, right? Because in the book, the painting, ages while he's having a good time. It's the reverse now, which is why I call it the pixel of Dorian Gray, is that on screen, your life looks amazing, but you could be extremely miserable, because what's happened is that instead of like celebrating our lives, we start comparing our lives. Oh, so-and-so is on, in Spain on vacation, or this is happening. Why can't we do this? And then also with the plethora of filters that we have now, you can never age. You look flawless, taller, just perfection, personified, even though reality is like jarringly different. So I do feel that with all the good stuff the social media has done, it's also sort of given birth to the social circus, which we find ourselves in, which has also led to, also from, when people look at all these founders of these tech companies, oh, they're under 30 and they already made Facebook. Oh, I could do that. Or, this has become this whole obsession of like, be young, be millionaires, and always look perfect, always be looking like this, dressing like this. It's just really blurred the lines between reality and dreams. And now we all look through life with like rose-colored glasses, right? Like the filters.
And I just want to point out your wickedly clever title once again.
Yes, it's brilliant. I mean, nod to Wilde, one of the great disruptors of literature, quite frankly. So thank you for that. Andrea, we have not very much time left. I knew that this conversation was going to be one of those that would generate a lot of opinions, but and I've really enjoyed the chat, because it looks like everybody wishes that skills, knowledge, and talent were what we all considered. But that being said, so Andrea, your perspective is invaluable, because you're coming from a world that's quite different from ours. We tend to think of the legal profession as being quite stat and immovable, but quite frankly, in our conversations, we found out that you're a lot more ahead of certainly the advertising industry in terms of creating initiatives like reverse mentoring. And can you talk about some of the programs that have been put in place that we could certainly emulate in our industry?
Well, the disclaimer is that the legal profession gets a lot of stuff wrong. We are, we try. Some of us try harder, and we're hoping to make, constant changes of the face of the legal profession. But I will say what law gets, I think, and this is connected, to tie it all up back to our discussion of value, is that we value lawyers at all ages. So older lawyers have experience, which we need. There's nothing better than going to someone who's been practicing for 40 years and saying, have you ever seen this before? And they say, absolutely. And then they, you know how to do it. They've got the experience. What you might bring to the table as a younger lawyer is, an understanding of technology, or, the newest case law, you just came out of law school, and so on. And, we have also, as Julia said, and I think Alex said this too, the sort of business model is that there's financial value to lawyers at all ends of the spectrum, as well. And so you're a profit center, no matter how much you charge, what age you are, and we value that. And I think there's a real interesting vertical, I think everyone's talked about this too, integration in legal. If you watch any kind of show or read any book, there's the older lawyer, there's someone in the middle, and then there's the younger lawyer, and you work together. Like I always say to people, I started working, let's say I was 23 or something, and, I was working closely with people who are 65, also people who are 50, also people who are 30, so there's always something that someone brings to the table, and there's value to that. There's value to clients to that. So I think the problem is if your industry doesn't have that institutional memory or doesn't value that someone remembers what happened 20 years ago, or doesn't value that people knew how it used to be, when you used to place newspaper ads like in person, or when you worried about what it looked like when someone would do this, I'm talking, I don't know anything about ads, but if you don't value that, if you don't find a way to value that, then you're certainly going to automatically limit the longevity of people in your field. So I think there's a challenge to your ad industry, right? We have a professional obligation to train younger people, which is what Alex was talking about. That may not exist in other fields. We're self-regulating. We imbue that in lawyers from the beginning, that you're going to be trained. We're going to train you how to do this craft, this skill. And it is something you learn over 40 years and you never stop learning. That's kind of why, we have kind of never had a problem in that respect. We also are allowed to force people to retire, which also helps.
Yeah.
Which you can't necessarily do in other industries because we're often partnerships. And so we have certain abilities to create rules on how you're a member of our partnership, which you can't do necessarily in a corporation. But, that also helps to encourage people to think of themselves at different stages, right? And maybe there's ways that you can try to do that. I don't know how, I wish I had the solutions, but try to, and I think it's all about shifting your values in your industry and shifting what you deem to be important and realizing the value that people bring at different stages of their careers, and those don't always have to be connected to, like selling stuff on social media. I mean, there are lots of, I think that there are lots of roles that people have to play. Like in our industry, we have lawyers who are only there to develop talent. They're hired as professional development lawyers and they're in the firm to help younger lawyers learn, to help older lawyers stay, current and all those things too. So I think we do a lot about that I think is, look, there's a lot of model in the legal industry you don't want to adopt and you guys are way ahead of us. But when it comes to valuing people at different ages and stages and monetizing that, and making sure clients know that they're paying for different things at different stages that gives them value, I think that we've managed to do that quite well. And that's something that, I don't know how you transition that to other industries. If you think medicine does that too, there's older doctors training younger doctors, stuff like that. There's value in that. And I think to try to figure out how you might adopt some of that concept in your industry could be definitely a way to change this. And to just
can I add a thought here? Because as you were talking, and it occurred to me, as Alex was earlier too, is this notion that comes from big consulting, and maybe other industries do it too, which is they have alumni. It's the model that comes from universities. So they stay in touch with these people because some of them, and that's starting to happen now, as older people in the workforce come back, but they also want to stay in touch with them because they know that these people in their alumni are sources of work, they're sources of ideas and information, of connections. So, so I think that's one idea that might catch on too.
Yeah, I think it is. Look, I think the challenges of the advertising industry are multiple, right? We definitely have this bias towards young, even though lots of old people use product. And I think if I look at the last sort of, because look, there have been sweeping changes in the industry, like while transferable skills from print are relevant, that there's definitely an ecosystem of, that digital has swept us into that is completely different. But I think one of the biggest challenges that agencies have, and this is kind of not for this conversation, but in some ways it is that we've moved from being strategic partners to tactical. When you're tactical, all you're doing is buying, or all you're doing is producing content, making something. Then there isn't the same kind of a value proposition. And so that's another thing to think about. Like, we've done this at our own hand. We've, and there's a whole bunch of, complex holding co, publicly traded, so we've got to think about how do we make money, how do we add value, and how do we take advantage of what I think are some really important opportunities with our people, with our talent. And, I don't believe, I think these are really complex issues. No one's doing a great job of them. It is not like Leo Burnett is going to become McKinsey, nor should they be. It's just about shifting the perception of what Leo does today. And part of it is clients, right? Getting clients to recognize, like, I've also, I mean, here's another reality. Like, I've never seen hourly rates in advertising lower. Like, I think our CFO has this funny story, like he pays his mechanic more on an hourly basis than some of our hourly rates in advertising. And so when that happens, there is pressure. There's pressure on the top line, there's pressure on the bottom line, and there's pressure on adding value. So it's an interesting time to be in the business. You know, there are many people that are on here from the media industry, boy, like the Bells and the out of home industry, and they've seen massive change. And partly that change is economic, and we've got to figure out, you know, in this time of disruption, and I think it was I think Andrea said it, like, what's work going to look like next? And the skills that we have in this business are transferable. You know, I don't know, some of the best people in media and in advertising are moving to just really interesting roles in banking and communication services, in other areas as a chapter, right? As a, okay, we've learned this and now we're going to apply it this way. So I don't know, I still am very optimistic about the future, but I do think that, you know, you have to have these practical conversations when you're joining an organization in your 20s. And Julia, you're right. This is not a job for life. It's a job for a moment in time. You're going to learn something. You're going to deliver something. You're going to have a, you know, kind of a relationship where you're both giving value. You get paid to do work. You get paid to, and there's that value. When that changes, be prepared.
Yes, you couldn't be more right. And although I do love the idea that law is actually creating a specific, like an actual lawyer who will act as a professional developer of people coming up through their world, or and even again, as we've all said, valuing intergenerational and monetizing intergenerational relationships and work is fantastic. So Alex,
well, how you pay people too, and how you charge clients can also change. So lawyers have come, we also do things like flat fee billing. So you want this, you wanted this, we're going to charge you this. And then it doesn't really matter who you have on it. You get one old person or 8 young people, you know? So there's also ways to do that, and how you pay people. If you're just paying people bonus, why don't you pay them a better base salary and like worry about that less? Or if you want to incentivize people to do something else, to use their networks, then pay them based on that, how many things they bring in or how many dinners they go to. There are ways to change your values based on how you bill and how you pay people. And law does that too.
That's the underlying piece of all of this. It affects everybody from Saeed all the way up to me, right? Change, constantly changing. And, you know, this disruption is going to continue and it's going to intensify. And that's going to be our job, constantly rejigging organizations to keep up and rejigging ourselves.
Yeah, I do want to point out the fact that nobody's talking about the elephant in the room. I think Alex came pretty close to saying it, but she stopped like just short. All of this, you know, some of it can be sort of fixed if we talk about value. Then if we stop giving too much, I don't know, preference or support to shareholder value. But that's what the problem is, really. That's why, you know, in order to like quarter by quarter, how do we increase shareholder value, right? Because holding companies and then, you know, the clients we work in, they're all listed on the stock exchange. So all this crunching, low pay per hour and, you know, things like that, if we just focused on people and not shareholder value, maybe some of it could be mitigated.
Yeah, but that's look, here's the, like, that's the other, it's a reality, like that's a reality. Yeah. And if you want to work in this business, this is the reality. So you have to, and I think Julia said this, I also think Andrea, like the push around commercial models, like let's change that. We have to adapt to the reality in front of us. There is no point whining. There is no point complaining. It's not going to get you anywhere. It's like, that's where, and I feel like all that does is it creates negativity, it creates, you know, and there's no benefit in that. Like, you've got to go, okay, here is, you know, you're 50 something years old in a world that has changed. What are you going to do to make this better so that you have velocity in your career? You know,
and to be thinking, I completely agree. And to be thinking when you're 20 and 30. So right? So my book was written for people over 50. Louise Barabay, who brought me into NABS, said, you know, in our industry, you got to be talking to people in their 40s. And we've had people in their 30s go through the program because they see the writing on the wall, right? So you have to be thinking about yourself too, constantly.
I think shareholder, sorry, Julie,
no,
sounded like such a good ending. I thought you were.
No.
I don't think Said's wrong that there's a focus on, you know, shareholder maximizing profit, right? And certainly that, and in the UK, law firms are that way too. They're allowed to have shareholders, right? So, you know, there's a tension there for sure. But I think I watched the documentary on Netflix recently about sexism in the film industry, and I thought a really interesting takeaway was they looked at the channel FX, and a woman had done a study, a film, you know, reviewer, and said you have the fewest number of female or racialized directors and producers or showrunners of anyone. And the head of the agency / you know, TV channel said, I'm going to take this challenge on. And within a year, switched it to something like 75% of their showrunners were women and racialized people. And their profits went up enormously. The quality of their shows increased, et cetera, et cetera. So my point being that these values don't have to conflict, you know?
That's right.
So if you want to talk about profit, there are lots of ways to do that. There are lots of companies that want to have, you know, like the benefit of having, like, you know, influencers and social media and stuff is you get all sorts of people are out there trying to build their businesses. And if you can service them, and in a way you change your business model, maybe how you charge them, I think that your profits may reflect that too. So I think to Said's point, you know, certainly there's been but I think there's a myopia in how profit is generated, you know, and I think maybe it's because that hasn't shifted. The people still making those decisions at the top are maybe the few in your industry who are older and who haven't shifted their mindset too. And I thought that documentary was an interesting.
And so what can happen?
I'm so sorry. We're getting. I apologize. We're at 11:56. We're probably going to lose a lot of people. I'm just going to direct my last question to Alex, because instead of whining and complaining, instead of in taking the challenge on at Dentsu, can you talk to us a little bit about what you've done? What tangible steps you've actually taken to reverse this, or not define worth by age at the Dentsu agency?
So Dentsu does not define work by age. And I think, you know, again, for me and for us and I'm not even going to speak to Dentsu, I'm just going to speak to the industry. I think, look, I sit on the NABS board. I'm super proud of the work that Julia and the team is doing. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Talking about this is important. Empowering people to take advantage of everything in front of them is really important. Giving people hope is really important. And I think, you know, my best advice, and I think Julia said this, a few of our panelists have said this, it's like, start at the beginning. Like when you take a job, it's like, what's the plan? Don't let yourself get caught. Now, if you're at the tail end, there are options. Canada has so many incredible retraining programs. We have so many opportunities. But, you know, at Dentsu, we hire people to drive value for our clients. And if you're driving value for our clients, that's the plan. Are we going through challenges in industry? We absolutely are. But I think some of the tools and the very practical suggestions, just even having this conversation is so important. And if you guys want to talk more, because I know we're getting to the tail end, just reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'm happy to engage.
All right. Now,
thank you for doing this, Amanda.
Oh, no, not at all. And there have been a number of questions that have come up in the question and answer section of the show. So I'm going to put those to everyone. Heidi McLeod would like to know, okay, well, Alex, you're addressing this now, but Heidi was curious how old you were when you were called long in the tooth.
Late 40s.
Late 40s. Okay. Now, this is actually a wonderful idea that Tony Lucisano has come up with. Julie, I'm going to put it to you and ask what you think of this. Why doesn't the advertising industry bring back some of the laid off workers to come back and train some of the green workers? There's certainly value there. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, so I think there are all kinds of new models that can be introduced. And so tip of the iceberg, right? These are very early days for extended lifespans and people wanting to work longer because they don't want a, 30-year sabbatical or they can't afford one. So if you're inside, maybe you say to your boss or to somebody higher up in the, hierarchy, like, I'm really interested in this issue. Let's start a panel. Maybe there is, Alex suggested this, maybe there's an agency that, that brings people together and I know it's already happening because I've heard this from ripe grads, people go back into the industry in an advisory capacity. So there are lots and lots of things for people to do. Somebody needs to just start the process, and this conversation is part of that. Does that help, Luch? Hopefully.
I think it no doubt will. Saeed, I actually have a question for you. So John Brooker makes the point that Bell fires people to keep overhead down and dividends to shareholders up. So Saeed, you have a global perspective on you've worked at ad agencies across the world. Has there been anybody that's done this well, where they're responding to this and not falling into the trap that many holding companies do to just keep dividends up?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to everyone's point, like it is, the model that we are, in currently, and is how it works. But I think you should perhaps elongate a bit, because what happens is it's always quarterly, shareholders, dividends. If you were to extend that and give people or the agencies an opportunity to focus on their people and do it, I don't know, yearly, because it's very hard to keep gotta do it this quarter, gotta make sure we close well for this quarter, gotta get those long, hours in and do this and do that and keep overhead low. You never give it an opportunity. That's why over time, with all the zero-based budgeting and modeling, what's this become is it's like every 3 months you're on the hook, and that kind of pressure is not good for morale. It's not good for the people who are it, and also not good for the leaders of those agencies. So if we were to shift that model, or the other ways that Julia was discussing, or Andrea, to the point where you're not under the gun every 3 months, right? Just, agencies need to do creative work. Have the time now where, chartered accountants. I have my life right now, or like in previous agencies now, is not just doing kind of creativity, but also making sure that we're hitting our targets, right? And, I think what's happened for the past couple of years is that creativity is not in the driver's seat. Procurement is in the driver's seat, which I feel is a big issue for our industry.
So can I weigh in on this? So leaving aside Alex's real world view, and Saeed, you've got a different, perspective on this particular world. We have an emerging model, and that's the ESG piece, which is environment, social governance. I don't know if it's ESG here, if that's widely used, but what's happening is that, companies have said our only business is to make money. And what's happening with activists who are taking roles and buying shares and launching public suits is that organizations, because it's in their interest, are starting to realize that they need to be thinking more broadly. So I'm not in any way, because I know virtually nothing about what it takes to run an agency under the kinds of pressures that you guys are talking about, but we have a useful model that we can look to as we think about the future.
Thank you for that. And that actually feeds into Gregory Flash's question. Hello, Greg, by the way, who's coming to us, I believe, from North Bay or Thunder Bay. It's coming from the north. Anyway, he is asking if there, and I'm actually going to put this to you, Andrea. Are you aware of any advocacy happening within any level of government, or any legal aspect that might be both raising awareness and also coming to combat age discrimination beyond what you've already spoken about, which is that it's illegal under the human rights, under Canada's human rights, please?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about, or not interesting about age discrimination, like often a lot of kinds of discrimination, but I can park that for a second, is that it's individualistic, so it is case by case. So it's certainly, an individual's experience of discrimination then can be assessed. There are organizations that certainly advocate on behalf of, I think often it's like the elderly, which doesn't necessarily address this issue, because it's so complex, I think, age discrimination, and it is tied in with, other types of discrimination quite often. The experience of a person in the service industry who happens to be from a marginalized group and is older, a racialized group, is different than, me, a lawyer who's a woman, and so on, right? So I think that we also have to think of it that way. And I think in your industry, you have to think of it that way too. But there's nothing specific that's happening. You do see that there is more of a challenge, even on a workplace by workplace basis, based on ideas of, say, toxicity in the workplace. We've seen that a lot on Parliament Hill. I've been talking about that, and that can sometimes be tied in. And if you have, kind of broad-based discrimination, if it's very obvious that, that there's clear discrimination based on age. You used to see it when it came to occupational requirements. There was all the cases about firefighters where, they set these arbitrary standards that, that wound up inherent, like as a result, discriminating against a bunch of people, and they weren't really standards that could be upheld. Anyway, so less so with age discrimination. There's nothing really like that. And I think, as we've all sort of discussed, I think it has to come from a value proposition within the industries, that this is not something we're going to tolerate. We're going to shift our thinking. We're going to help people stay relevant for longer. And we're not just going to, take what we can and move on. So I think that's kind of where the shift is happening, more from a mindset and a value-based change, from what I see in my practice, at least, rather than a legislative change.
All right, fair enough. Thank you for that. Sorry, Julia, did you want to weigh in?
And I just quickly to say that
Of
I
course.
love Greg's question, and where my head went is, so I said ESG is a good model. I think that we need to be thinking about this ageism, in all its forms and all its glory, according to the models that we have before us. So think about how things have changed. Certainly in my lifetime, women's rights, gay rights, now we're talking BIPOC and inequality, and so Me Too, the world. So Andrea's example of women in the film industry. So the world has gone through this process. So we need to identify what those steps are, what has worked in the past, and let's do them for ourselves.
One thing I might add, your industry could think about, and I think Alex, we talked about this before, is, some organizations, for instance, there's a push to try to create diversity on the board level, right? In all realms. And, we have an abysmal record with, for instance, having women on boards, or people who are from racialized groups on boards, for instance. So think about that in your industry. There's no better way to change values than if you change who sits at the table, literally. And in some places, you have a shadow board of young people where you try to train them. And I think Alex can speak to this. With the skills, talk about skills that will help them later on. And this addresses what, Saeed was saying about how young people feel this immediate challenge to be great as young people. Well, start thinking about your career, be great, be valuable and relevant when you're 50. And the way to do that is if you sit on these boards, if you gain those skills, so try to shift who's making the decisions in your industry is going to, I think, have a big impact on what you see on actually, as a person.
And Alex, I know that you've done a lot of work with shadow boards. So did you want to briefly just outline?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the one thing that we're doing. We definitely have an advisory board at Dentsu, and that really is to kind of make sure that we're aware as a management team of the perspective. Like, I've been in the industry a long time. I don't know everything. Right? I want voices, and I want points of view, and I want, a more collaborative world. I think Andrew's exactly right, though. Diversity on boards has to be, I think that makes a big difference. I think that, look, no one wants to hear it, but, everything is a work in progress. I think going into a company and, finding leadership that wants to be a force for good is a big theme. And Julia touched on this, like that's, we are hearing that it is a absolute, so doing the right thing is important. And at the same time, we have shareholders. You got to run, these are businesses. We have to run. So we've got to figure out a way to make business and work. Like, this has to be a business opportunity. Otherwise, all it is just
Noise.
Conversation and futility. So I think it's thinking through and figuring out ways to fund. I'm concerned now, there's a whole, because there's so many jobs that are open and, there's such a war for talent, that we are literally taking, 2 or 3 year employees and we're paying them way more than what I believe anyone can bear. I think that, and what we've seen, having been in the business a long time, you see the waves, right? So there's a wave happening right now. Is this wave sustainable? And then what happens? So if you're getting hired at way beyond your punch level, you've been in a company for 5 or 6 years, you have a title, titles create expectation. If you're not delivering value, you're not going to be around. Like, that's just look, I hate to say it, but no one owes you anything. And I have learned that personally in my career. That is the advice I give. We try at the company that I work for and with, we want to be a force for good. We are trying really, really hard. But I think as an industry, this is something that all of us need to sort of recognize as a big issue.
Yes, and in talking about things that aren't just esoteric and just about conversation, Teresa has an excellent question. I'm going to put it to you, Alex, and then I thank you all for staying longer than we were originally contracted, but I can tell that there's still conversations that need to be had. But Teresa says, from a hiring perspective, when she's looking for, not when she specifically, or when anyone is looking for candidates to be a team that happen to be a younger team, there is a tendency to believe that somebody who's older might not mesh well with the team because they come from a different life stage. And is it wrong to think this way? And how do we avoid falling into this trap? I don't know if Alex wants to.
Look, I mean, I'm going to answer this, and I'm going to date me. Poppycock, that's ridiculous. That is not the view. I mean, look, teams need diversity. I think the old model of fitting in versus belonging is something that the entire industry, we're all looking for diversity of voice where we can, bring different teams together. I don't think a pack of 50-year-olds is as effective as a mix of people. I feel like that's the benefit, especially in an industry like advertising, where frankly, our job is to understand human behavior. Our job is to understand both the traditional and the next. Like that's what makes it exciting. So I would encourage us to wrap our arms around diversity more and belonging.
Thank you for that. That is a great answer. And to that end, I knew that this would not be a safe conversation. I knew that it wouldn't be just one person being panel and then the next person answering. I knew it would be a living, breathing thing, much like Julia's RIGHT program is. So to all of you, I thank you for your varied perspectives. I thank you for your experience. I thank you for calling things ridiculous, Alex, because sometimes these things need to be called that as being ridiculous. And I would say that we should do what Julia counseled us to do, which is celebrate, don't compare, and be alive until you die. So with that, I say to the end of this event, I will say the next event that the Ad Club will put forth will be a little different from this one. It is a scientific out-of-home approach to Canadians returning from lockdown. So that one will be headed up by my extremely esteemed and brilliant colleague, Lise Mason. And I'm looking forward to seeing that on August 12th at 1 p.m. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for staying with us. Panel, thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
Audience, it has been a fantastic discussion, as I knew it would be. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.